When Grandpa George died, it felt like the whole world had suddenly tilted on its axis. The kind of shock that leaves your chest tight and your mind spinning with 1,000 what-ifs and regrets. The house where I had spent nearly every summer of my childhood, a place so full of laughter and memories, felt hollow and silent. The scent of old wood and the faint trace of his pipe tobacco hung in the air like ghosts that wouldn't leave. My name is Emily Harper, and I was the one who found out the truth, something no one else was ready to face. I remember the day I stumbled upon it like it was yesterday. I'd gone over to Grandma June's place to help with cleaning out some of Grandpa's old papers and letters, thinking it would be a way to keep her company. Grandma, frail and fragile since Grandpa passed, barely spoke. Her eyes, once bright with mischief and warmth, were clouded with sorrow. But even in her silence, I could feel her clinging to the remnants of their life together. It started with a stack of bills and bank statements buried under a pile of faded photographs. I was sorting through them, trying to figure out what was important and what could be tossed, when a certain pattern caught my eye. There were withdrawals, large sums of money, taken out almost monthly over the last few years. Some were in cash, others transfers that didn't make sense given Grandpa's steady pension and fixed income. At first, I thought maybe Grandma was managing things differently these days, maybe paying bills or covering something unexpected. But then I noticed the name attached to the withdrawals. David. My Uncle David. David was the eldest of Grandpa's 3 children. Tall, confident, and always the one to speak first at family gatherings, he was someone who carried himself like he owned the room. He had been the executor of Grandpa's estate, trusted by everyone, including me. But now, suddenly, his name was tied to those missing funds, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I tucked the papers away, my mind racing. Was it possible I was wrong? Was there an explanation I hadn't thought of? I told myself to calm down, to not jump to conclusions without proof. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandpa's face, so full of life just weeks before he passed. Would he have wanted this? Would he have wanted his family torn apart by secrets and lies? I started to quietly dig deeper, asking Grandma questions about finances, subtly trying to piece things together without raising suspicion. But Grandma, overwhelmed by grief, didn't notice, or maybe she just didn't want to. One evening, I found myself alone in Grandpa's study, the room lined with books and dusty trophies from his younger days. I sat down at his old oak desk and pulled out the papers again. This time, I spread everything out, the bank statements, receipts, and even emails I managed to get from the bank's online portal. I wasn't a detective, but I was determined to get to the bottom of this. What I found shocked me. David had been quietly transferring money out of Grandpa's account for years, using fake invoices and made-up expenses. The sums weren't small. It was enough money to fund a second life, new cars, vacations, even a beach house nobody in the family knew about. I sat back, heart pounding. How could he do this? How could he betray his own parents? More than that, how could he think no one would notice? And what would this mean for Grandma, who's already struggling to keep the house and pay her medical bills? The more I learned, the heavier the weight on my shoulders grew. I felt trapped between love and anger, loyalty and justice. I wanted to protect Grandma, but I also knew that if I kept silent, David would keep stealing, maybe even take everything. It was the kind of dilemma that haunts you late at night, when the world is quiet and your mind races through every possible outcome. If I confronted David now, it might destroy the family. But if I didn't, I'd be complicit in the betrayal. I remember standing by the window that night, looking out at the stars, feeling small and powerless. The house was so quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, marking time that Grandpa would never see again. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, but I ignored it. Nothing felt normal anymore. Nothing would, until I made a choice. The will reading was scheduled for next week, a gathering where all the family would come together to hear Grandpa's final wishes. It was supposed to be a solemn moment of closure, but for me, it had become a ticking time bomb. I knew I had to decide, stay quiet and keep the peace, or reveal what I'd found and risk everything. Because once the truth was out, There was no turning back. The morning of the will reading, the air in Grandma June's old house felt thick, like the quiet before a storm. I arrived early, my hands trembling, heart pounding in my chest like a warning drum. The house smelled like polished wood and old memories, but something darker lingered beneath it, like the weight of secrets that had been kept too long. Family members trickled in. My aunts and uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in their Sunday best. They exchanged hesitant smiles and whispered condolences, but their eyes held a fragile edge. Grief had left everyone on the brink of snapping. David arrived last, his usual confident smile in place, but there was something colder in his eyes. I caught his gaze for a brief moment, and I swear I saw a flicker of suspicion. Did he already know I was onto him? Grandma sat in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in a shawl, her hands clasping the envelope containing Grandpa's will. I watched her closely, her face pale, lips pressed tight, as if bracing herself for the pain to come. The lawyer began reading the will, his voice steady but soft. Grandpa George had left his estate equally divided among his 3 children, David, my Aunt Claire, and my Uncle Tom. There was also a trust fund set up specifically for Grandma's care, untouched and separate from the estate. David's smug smile faltered when the lawyer read that part, as if realizing his plan was unraveling. That's when I stood up. My voice shook, but I forced it steady. Before we move on, I said, I have something to share. The room fell silent. Eyes turned to me. Surprise, confusion, even irritation flickered across some faces. I laid the papers on the table, the bank statements, receipts, emails. These prove Uncle David has been withdrawing money from Grandpa's accounts without permission. For years. Grandma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David's face went pale, then angry. This is ridiculous, Emily. You have no right to accuse me of something so serious. I have proof, I said, voice firmer now. Unauthorized withdrawals, fake invoices, even a second home bought in secret. This isn't just a mistake, it's theft. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. You're trying to ruin me. You're making baseless accusations to sabotage the family. I met his gaze evenly. I'm trying to protect Grandma and Grandpa's legacy. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then, unexpectedly, Grandma spoke. Her voice was weak, but unwavering. David, I knew. The shock in the room was palpable. You knew, someone whispered. Grandma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saw the bank statements last month. I asked him about it. He lied. David looked devastated, the anger replaced by shame. I needed the money, Mom. I didn't know how else to ask. Her disappointment cut deeper than any words. You betrayed your father. You betrayed all of us. I realized then this wasn't just about money. It was about broken trust, hidden pain, and a family on the verge of falling apart. The room was frozen, every eye fixed on Grandma June and David. Her words hung heavy in the air, like a weight pressing down on all of us. I could see the conflict in David's eyes. The guilt, the shame, and something else, maybe regret. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Grandma, still trembling, looked straight at David and said, I kept quiet because I was afraid. Afraid of what this family might become if I exposed you. But I can't protect you anymore. Not from yourself. David sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. I could hear the ragged catch of his breath as the truth settled in. Then came the twist no one expected. A soft knock at the door interrupted the heavy silence. It was my Aunt Claire, holding an envelope with trembling hands. She said quietly, I found this among Grandpa's things just before we came. I think it changes everything. Curious, Grandma opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten by Grandpa George, dated just a few weeks before his passing. I read it aloud, voice steady despite the lump in my throat. To my family, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. There's something I need to confess. I knew about the money David had been taking. I confronted him, but I chose to forgive him because I believed in family, no matter what. But I also want you to know this. I've adjusted my will to protect June, and to give the estate equally to my children. My hope is that this will heal us, not break us. Remember, no amount of money is worth losing each other." The room was silent again, but now it was softer, like a fragile truce had been declared. Grandma wiped her tears. "He loved us enough to try to save us." David looked up, eyes red. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was drowning, and I made terrible choices. I'm sorry." The pain in his voice was real, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the mistakes. After the will reading ended, the house was quieter than before, but the tension had shifted. What was once a simmering undercurrent of suspicion and grief became a fragile space for truth and, maybe, forgiveness. David didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stayed behind to talk with Grandma June. They spoke quietly, the air heavy but sincere. I could hear fragments, apologies, tears, promises to make things right. Later, I sat beside Grandma on the porch, the sun dipping low and casting a soft golden glow over the garden Grandpa had lovingly tended. She took my hand in hers, fragile but steady. "You did what was right, Emily," she said softly. "Sometimes, love means facing the hardest truths." We decided to involve the attorney and the bank. David's access to the estate was suspended while everything was investigated. It wasn't about punishment alone. It was about protecting what was left of Grandpa's legacy and making sure Grandma's care was secure. David agreed to pay back the money he had taken, slowly, with interest. More importantly, he started seeing a counselor to confront the deeper issues that had driven him to steal from his own family. The rest of the family rallied around Grandma, helping her with bills, repairs to the old house, and emotional support. The cracks in our family were still there, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might start to heal. Sitting there with Grandma, watching the sky turn pink and orange, I realized that family is messy, full of mistakes, secrets, and disappointments. But it's also full of love, resilience, and hope. Grandpa's legacy wasn't just the money or the house. It was the strength we found when we faced the truth, even when it hurt. And that made all the difference.